This is an interview at the Embassy Suites Hotel, Syracuse, New York. It is the 3rd of June, 2008, approximately 9 a.m. The interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Norman Charles Champagne. I was born on February 25th, 1932. And what else did you want?
But where?
I was born in Buffalo, New York.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to going into service?
9 years of school. I had 8 years of, I graduated from high school at Kenmore and entered into Kenmore Senior High School for 1 year. I had had enough and I left school. And my father said, "You don't want to go to school? Then you can go to work." So he had a gas station and I worked for Texaco for 2 years before I joined the service.
Now, did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted in the Marine
Why
Corps.
did you decide to enlist?
I just had it. There was no work where you could make a living and move out of your home. And you had to stay at home at that time because work was, I was working at American Standard, who made furnaces in Buffalo, and you make $1.09 an hour. Well, and then you had to pay, I had to pay my mother some, to stay at home, and you couldn't buy anything, you couldn't do anything, so I just decided to maybe further my education by going into the service. So I joined the Marine Corps. I actually went down and joined the Army. And the Army told me at that point that they were full and they weren't taking any more recruits.
Now, what year was this?
That was in 1951, February, or January. So I went, on the way out of the building, my brother was already in the Marine Corps. He was a year younger than me. He was 18 years old. And I saw the Marine Corps office, so I went in, and they were glad to see me. So I joined the Marine Corps, and I was taken on the 14th of February of 1951.
Where did you go for your basic training?
I went to, because there were so many new recruits, Parris Island was loaded, so we went and we started our basic training at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina for about 10 days, and then they moved us down into Parris Island, where we stayed for 11 weeks.
What was your basic training like?
You know, it was it was the same old thing, learning how to march and learning how not to when to keep your mouth shut and listen to orders and how to fire a rifle. I had never fired a rifle in my life, or bayonets, combat training along with marching and what have you. But it was, it got better, you know, as time went on and you got used to it, you became acclimated to it, and I was gung-ho as hell by the time I got out.
So you never regretted your decision at the
No.
time?
Did you, when you first went down there and they started screaming and yelling at you?
I wondered what I had done wrong, what I had done, yes. And I wondered what I was doing there. And at that point, I was kind of leery about why I joined and, you know, what did I do this for? But after a while, it made sense what they were trying to do to me or for me. And they were trying to make a better person out of you, what they were trying to do. And so by the time I got out of basic training and came home, even my father noticed a difference in my attitude and, you know. But you learn a lot and you become a more mature person and whatever.
Did you go for any additional training?
The only addition, yes, at that point, I was assigned, my background was driving truck. I had driven a tow truck in the evening part-time for Stevens Motors in Buffalo on Main Street. And so I ended up in the 2nd Medical Battalion as an ambulance driver for the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Also hauling water with trucks and garbage and whatever, but primarily field ambulance. And got involved with saw some nasty stuff. We had, I was involved with 3 amphibious landings. In June of 1951, we all boarded, the whole division boarded ships at Norfolk, and we went out to sea about 10 miles, so we couldn't see shore. And we stayed out there for 2 days, and then we made an assault landing at Camp Lejeune, who has the largest, Camp Lejeune actually has 14 miles of beach that you can use for landings, and they have 33 miles of ocean front as it is. Firing ranges complete in the whole shot. I mean, these ships were firing rounds onto Onslow Beach or inland I forget the name of the area beyond Onslow Beach. But we made an amphibious landing there, the full division, and the 82nd Airborne from Fort Bragg were our opponents. And of course you've probably been through there, somebody decides who won the war. Well, we won the war. But the 82nd said we won the war. So, but anyway, after that, in September, the whole division went to Vegas, Puerto Rico. It's an island southeast of the island of Puerto Rico. And half that island is broken up. There were civilians on that island. It's 21 miles long, and the 7 miles in the middle are civilians. And 7 miles out to your left or to the west are for the Marine Corps, and the other 7 miles to the east was a total firing range, where you take like the Iowa and the Mo would come in and fire full broadsides. It's the first time I ever saw a battleship fire a full broadside. But they would fire 16-inch guns, for half the day at the south end or east end of the island. So anyway, we made a full division landing there. Then we went down to South America and back up, so I was around 3-4 weeks, and we came back and made an amphibious landing at Onslow Beach again. So that's the training basically that I had as far as combat went up until, right through till I decided that I had had enough. Because after the first of the year, and we started into 52, we weren't involved in any more amphibious landings, or any, we were involved in some combat training at Camp Lejeune, to the point where we were called out one day with ambulances, and they had killed, the Marine division there was, or a couple regiments were going through combat, there was an assault. I don't know where it was in Lejeune, but they were going through this assault and with live rounds. And mortars fell short. And they killed something like 8 to 12 Marines, and they wounded several dozen. And we pulled those guys out. Now that was my first experience with seeing, dead or wounded or anything like that. So I had seen it before I went to Korea, for what it looks like. So we took these guys to the Naval Hospital, and that was an all-day adventure. That was getting them out of there. And that was my only experience with actual combat, real combat, before I went to Korea.
When did you go to Korea?
I left San Diego on the 15th of September of 1952, bound for Kobe, Japan. That's where we would pick up our orders. we didn't know what, my MOS was a 3531, which was heavy truck. And we ran into a typhoon off Wake Island. And we were in that typhoon for 5 days. And the ship actually cracked its hull to the point where they had to put wet. I remember the guy coming through our quarters, everybody's throwing up. They couldn't feed you. You couldn't take a shower because they couldn't pump on water. All they could get was salt water, so you couldn't shower in that. And the guy coming through with a welding unit, and we asked him where he was going. And he said he had to put some welding. We had a crack in the bow because that ship was slamming in that water. And he came back through and we asked him, "What'd you do?" And he said, "I put 19 rounds of weld in the bow." He said, "But I sealed it up, don't worry about it." And he was first Marine. And I said, "Don't worry about it." Jesus, here we are out there, there is nobody on either side of us, fore and after. We're all alone out there. Finally we got out of the storm. And we made it into Kobe 4 or 5 days late. And Kobe, Japan, and we were there for 2 days, and they gave us our orders when we left. When we set sail, we had the orders for 18,000 Marines and 400 Navy corpsmen who were aboard that ship. And we were bound for Incheon. And the orders were opened the next morning. And they called my name out, Corporal Champagne, 0311. So I said to the guy, the sergeant that was there, I said, "What is an 0311? And he said, "That's an infantry." Infantry? I'm not infantry, I'm a truck driver. You know, I'm 35, 31. So I went to a lieutenant. I'll never forget this. I went to the lieutenant and I said, "Sir," Corporal Champagne, blah, 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 and I said, "I have been given orders as a 0311. And he said, "Yes, that's right." He said, "You'll be a fire team leader if we can train you properly. What's your problem?" And I said, "Sir, I'm a 3531 truck driver." He said, "I know what a 3531 is, but I don't need truck drivers in Korea." So he said, "I need infantry." Yes, sir. So I walked away. That was that. So I went to my buddy Jack Molin, who was an infantryman, and him and I had joined the Marine Corps together, and we were on the same ship going overseas. And, although I hadn't seen him in over a year. And Jack said he thought that was funny. He laughed. He said, "Good, they finally got you, put you to work." So the next day we pulled into Incheon, about two miles out, maybe a mile out, and the Army actually took us ashore in Incheon. They put us on LCIs and LCVPs, and they took the approximately 2,200 men ashore. Now, you talk about the Marine Corps and their publicity. When we get, and we're marching up this shore, we got full packs on and weapons and everything, and we're marching up the shore, this gangway. There's about a 30 or 40 piece Marine Corps band, and they're playing the Marine Corps hymn. Well, these guys from the Army thought that was the funniest thing in their lives. You know, that we had brought our own band. We told them we didn't bring these guys. We didn't. So anyway, we got on a train at that point, and they loaded us all on a train and told us to sit down or lay down in the boxcars. We were put in boxcars, and we were taken immediately north, about 12 miles, as I remember. And why did we have to sit down or lay down? Was because of possible sniper fire. And they didn't want anybody sitting in windows or anything like that. So they had us lay down or sit down. So we got to the end of the rail and we got off and lined up, and that point we were dispatched, the trucks knew where to take different groups. To the 5th Marines, 7th Marines, 1st Marines, that were the regiments, the 1st, 5th, and 7th of the 1st Division. Or the 11th, which was the artillery division, or regiment. So they knew where to take us, and we ended up, and we marched, they gave us chow at that point, a hot meal, down at the base of a hill, and we could hear our, incoming. Every once in a while, we'd see a round go off somewhere. So I'm getting very nervous at this point. So we climbed the hill just before dark, and I'm put in a slot on the trench line and told to watch at this point. And I'm looking out at a hill in front of me. And I'm all by myself. They set us along the line. And so at some point we could all meet up with the rest of the gang in the platoon and find out who was who, and the platoon to the company to whatever. So we were in Dog Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. 1st Regiment, I should say, 1st Marine Division. And we were in the 2nd Platoon, the 1st Squad. And it got dark, about 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, we started to receive heavy incoming. And most of it mortar. And 61 and 82 millimeter mortars coming in. And then they hit. Bunker was right out in front of us, Bunker Hill. And they hit Bunker with a couple of companies of men. It was a full scale. They wanted to take Bunker that night. And there was the shit at the fan for about 2 hours. And then the Gooks, or Chinese, withdrew. But I'll never forget, as long as I live, when they stopped firing and it got kind of quiet, I could hear a Marine yelling, "Oh, mommy, I'm dying." He said that 2 or 3 times, and then there was silence.
Now, did you see the Chinese at all, or?
Yes, we could see them because we were setting up flares.
Mm-hmm.
So we could see them up on the upper ridge. And the Marines were down on the back side of the hill. They weren't on the forward side. They were on the back side of Bunker into OP Hetty, which was next to them. There were 2 OPs together. And Hetty later became OP Yellow. In fact, we called it Yellow at that point. And Bunker, we could see the Chinese coming up. But we also had one tank, one M47 come up, and he came into one of the slots, and he fired 90, his high velocity 90, he fired that right into the top of the hill. What he would do, he'd come up, and he would fire about this high off the top of the ridge, or a foot off the top of the ridge. And so in the 50, he had a 50 on, and that's what he would do. So if any Chinese come up over the ridge, they were coming into a hail of fire.
Mm-hmm.
And if he heard or saw anything, he would let go of that 90. And the only thing wrong with that is he would bring incoming. Because the Chinese could hear him coming up.
Mm-hmm.
We could hear him coming up. And he'd come in the slot, and he was about, I don't know, he's probably half a block away from me. He had come into a slot. There was only about, in our company area, there was about 4 slots where a tank could go in. So he was sitting there and he was firing. And I didn't know what he was at first, and then they told me that it was an M47. He'd be gone, don't worry about it, he'd be gone pretty soon. And then the incoming started. Right where we were, and I asked him what, this one guy next to me told me that tank is drawing incoming, and he will draw incoming, because they know he's there. They can hear him come up. So anyway, that ended that night, and then I met the other troops and the other men of our company, and we were there every night We were in the same position every night until the 12th of October, 8 days, and then the 1st Division had been online since the 1st Regiment had been online since the 1st of September. They were taken offline, and the 5th was brought up in their place, and we were pretty well beat up. So we were taken offline, and at that point we met the whole platoon, the battalion, what have you. And
Okay, while you were on the line, where did you stay? What kind of living conditions did you
we
have?
lived in a bunker, and the bunker was about, as I recall it, it was about half the size of this room right here. And it had big timbers. We slept on the timbers. You know, you could sleep about 4 guys, each bunker. And those bunkers were on the forward side of the hill, sandbagged in, and there was about our company, I don't know, it was 10 or so, our platoon, it was probably 8 to 9 bunkers. And we slept in those bunkers. And there was an aperture in the bunker, which we would always fill with the corned beef hash, because nobody ate the corned beef hash. So we filled the bunker, I remember that, we put your corned beef hash in the aperture of that bunker, because we ain't looking out of there anyway, they're gonna pick you off, and it was good protection, added, you know, reinforcement to the bunker.
So I mean, this hash was in like cans or?
Yeah, the brown can, corned beef hash, it was a sea ration.
Okay.
Nobody ate corned beef hash. Nobody ate corned beef. That's in like dog food.
Do you eat it today?
No. So anyway, we were there and we would sleep there. Now at night while you were sleeping, you would hear the rats, because we had ponchos hanging down the side wall, because if it got heavy rain, the sandbags would start dripping rain and it would come in where you were sleeping on these, like a stretcher or whatever you could find to make your bed up. But that's what your bed was. And you had a sleeping bag. And you had a poncho. And at night, behind those ponchos, you could hear the rats running around. They were looking for food. Because what we did, after we got through eating, was we would throw the cans and not the mess gear, but the cans and wrappers and everything off the front of the hill. Just throw it off the front of the hill. Because now if the Gooks or the North Koreans or Chinese would try to sneak up the hill at night, they'd be crawling over this garbage or cans and they'd make noise. So that's why we did it. We always threw our garbage off the front, or if we were on Outpost Vegas, which was part of the Gambling Bowl or the Nevada Cities Bowl, we threw everything off the backside of Vegas, because that was the ideal spot for them to try to attack us, was from the rear. So you throw all your garbage off the rear of Vegas. There's probably garbage over there today, still buried somewhere. So, again, we were there for 8 days and then we were relieved. The 7th Division, or 7th Regiment was on our right flank. And during that 8 days that we were there initially, at the start of my journey, or my career there, they got they got the most of the beating, because they were over near the Hook, which was a famous, if you know anything about Korea, the Hook, at least on the eastern front, or the western front, was the worst. The worst battle, was one of the worst battles, was the Hook, and then the Nevada Cities Bowl. We're back in reserve. When we go back, what we do, we're on the Jamestown Line. That's what they call the MLR. The main line of resistance was called the Jamestown Line. It pretty much followed the 38th parallel all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast. On our left flank was the KMC, the Korean Marine Corps, we called them. They were Korean citizens who had joined the Army or Marine Corps. They all wanted to be Marines. And we had a regiment there first, and they were at the sea. They were all on islands and that because the Yellow Sea was right here. We could actually get gun support and close ground support, carrier-based, or 16-inch. The Iowa would be there, the Missouri, the New Jersey, whoever was off duty would come up into the slot, into the Yellow Sea, and fire missions for us, 16-inch, in behind group lines. We couldn't see behind these hills, but air cover would certainly point out that there was some heavy Russian guns, if you will, or tanks. See, they would bring up their T-34. They had the Russian T-34 tank, the only tank they had, and that was a World War II tank. Of course, when we started out in Korea, we had the M4, which was Patton's tank. And slow but sure, we got the M26 Pershing, and then it became the M46. And that we got rid of the 75 low velocity gun on it and went to a high velocity 90. Now a 90 millimeter on a tank. The 90 millimeter that was on the tank was could fire at about the same speed as an M1 rifle, about 26 to 2,800 feet per second, and very, very accurate, up to at least 3,000 yards. And they could pick like a spot on a dresser drawer and hit it if they could. You know, he had a 20 power scope, the tanker, and he could pick out. We had a goop fired at us once out of a hill, about 500 yards to our right front, and he was firing a machine gun through burlap, and he picked off a couple of guys, and we had an FO come up, a forward observer, and he looking out with binoculars, and he spots him. He spotted some smoke coming off the side of that hill, and he said, "You got a sniper with a machine gun, and he's in that hole," and he marked it, and all of a sudden we hear the rumbling and the noise, and up the road, it was up the road to the MLR, up come a M46. He went into the slot. Well, he knew he was going to bring incoming. This was broad daylight. This was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So he immediately just swung the gun a little bit, and he let go. And he hit about 2 foot wide of the hole. Now, I still could not see the hole, but he hit it about 2 foot wide, and the forward observer told him to move told him the coordinates, told him to repeat. Now, he fired again, he hit the other side, because he couldn't see the actual hole. So this FO sees that the guy fires again with the machine gun. And I'm on the outside, and the tank is where your bedroom is there, and they told me to go up and grab that phone off the back of that tank and tell the person inside, or whoever the commander of that tank, to move, I forget, 2 degrees right or something, and he should be on target. So I go up there, and I pick up the phone, and I hear the guy inside, and I said, your shot is at 2 degrees to the right. And I hung up the phone, and he fired. Well, when he fired, I got knocked back about 15, 20 feet. ass over teacup. And nobody told me there was a muzzle brake on a tank that was going to do this. And they all laughed. They thought that was funny because they knew that this would happen. They could have told him on the radio,
Mm-hmm.
but they sent Champagne to pick up that phone and call that tank in. So I did that. Anyway, the round he fired went right into the hole of that machine gunner. It blew a big explosion come out of the, all of a sudden on the hill. And that was where the sniper was. And he put it right in the hole, right in the hole. Now you couldn't do this with the old M4s of that. But anyway, that was the difference between the tanks we had in Korea. Some people, when this war first started, up at the, up at Frozen Chosen and that, and they had the old M4s, and that tank was not the equal to the Russian T-34, which the Chinese had when they came across the Yalu. But by the time I got there, the M46 was alive for a while, the M46 and then M47. So the tanker we never saw a T-34. We heard them come up at night and they were used as artillery pieces. But we never saw a T-34 come at us for a daylight raid or anything like that. But they saw the M46. We used them in daylight, some daylight raids. You'd send out half a dozen tanks and maybe two may be crippled or they had to be towed back in again because they hit them pretty good. Because they would draw a lot of it coming. So, where are we at now?
Well, what was your opinion of the South Korean Army?
The South Korean Army, I don't know. The Marine Corps had no South Koreans in their ranks. The Marine Corps, that was their understanding with the 8th Army, who was our boss, that we would have, or I Corps, we would have the only South Koreans in our ranks would be interpreters. And there'd be one per company or one per battalion or whatever. But no soldiers. The Army, on the other hand, the United States Army had ROKs in their ranks, right with them. The Marine Corps did not want it. After the Marine Corps relieved the ROKs in July or August of 1952, they knew then, the general at that point, whoever that was, he knew that we didn't want the ROKs with us. It was hard to manage them. They just didn't have the tradition or I guess he figured there was a fighting spirit that the Marine Corps had, but it was a different, no way when he had it, so we didn't.
Did you ever have any contact with other foreign elements like Greeks or Turks?
No, when I was driving truck now, but that goes on later in '53. But after the battle for the Hook, the 1st Commonwealth Division was next to us on our right flank at the 7th Regiment ended. See, the Marine Corps had a 35-mile front. And 17 outposts. And they said it was almost impossible to guard or keep these people. We were guarding the Valley to Seoul. That's what our main objective was. That's why they moved the Marine Corps to the Western Front, was to guard the Valley to Seoul. If they broke through the MLR, the Jamestown Line where we were, the only thing behind them was the Imjin River, and they had a beautiful bridge. It was like the Brooklyn Bridge, the Freedom Bridge. And they pour over that Freedom Bridge and go right down that valley. That valley was, I don't know how many miles wide, but it went right to Seoul. And that's what their objective was. And that's why they harassed us for the whole time we were there so badly. But The, I'm sorry, you asked about the,
Any foreign units that?
yes, after we had the battle at Nevada Cities, a major battle where they took all three outposts and we took two of them back in a daylight attack. In March of '53, we came up on the Black Watch. No, I lied, wait a minute. In November of '52, the Black Watch was overrun at the Hook. They had, and that was the first element or unit of the Commonwealth Division, was the Black Watch. They were a Scottish division, or a Scottish regiment. And next to them was the Princess Pat Canadian Light Infantry, the Royal Vendus, which is the Royal 22nd from Montreal or Quebec, and the RAR, which was the Royal Australian Regiment. There was some New Zealanders, but they were all part of the Commonwealth Division. They were great guys. They overtook them at the Hook and run them off the Hook that night, and they took it back the next day. And the Hook was, what we called the Hook, was just the hills come out and stuck out into Goonie Land, and we had two outposts on the right and left flank to guard Detroit and Frisco. We're guarding the any assault from the Chinese against the Hook, because it was a very vulnerable spot. If they broke through the Hook, they could see in behind our lines. That's the way it went.
Mhm.
They broke through the Hook, they could see behind our lines, and the 2nd or 7th Army Division who was over there. And they could also see the Indian River and whatever. But so it was very, very important to guard and maintain, the Hook, that we would maintain our presence at the Hook. So anyway, the Commonwealth, when I got there, the Black Watch was taking care of the Hook. Well, they lost the Hook and then they took it back. When they took it back, that's when we met the guys from the Black Watch. 2 days later, and they were telling us about the story of, how the Goops were in the trench line. And what they had done was they all got in their holes that night, and they were overrun by like a battalion of Chinese against about a company of Black Watch. They called in VT fire and boxed us in, and they just fired on the Hook. Time-fused artillery, which explodes overhead and rains shrapnel down on you, or they boxed them in. They fired on their own people. But we were in holes or in caves. And this is what saved the Hook, the first time it happened. But when they got out, when the artillery was lifted, just about dawn, they come out of their holes, and the trench line was full of Chinese. So it was in hand for about an hour. And they, Black Watch, kept the Hook. But they were the first ones. Then we did, later in '53, we met some guys from the 7th Division, 7th U.S. Army Division, who had, I don't know if you know their emblem or their patch. It's like two arrowheads inverted. We call them the crushed beer cans of Korea. And the 2nd Division, which is the Eagle Head, we call them the Pontiac Division of Korea. And I don't know what they called us. Something, I'm sure. But that's the only ones that we really stayed in contact with. But see, when we were called the 1st Marine Division Reinforced, and we had to be reinforced because of the amount of action that took place in '53. The month of July was almost constant incoming. The month of July, the month that the war ended, In fact, the last 3 days, it never stopped. They constantly pounded us and pounded us. So in order to keep the MLR intact, we had 10 artillery, U.S. Army artillery battalions, plus 3 Marine battalions, plus probably 2 KMC battalions firing in support. They just kept firing and firing and firing. But if we would have had the Army artillery battalions, we'd have lost them. They would have overrun us. There was no way you could stop it. There was so many of them. If they wanted something, it was so hard because there were so many of them. If they wanted to commit to something, and they were very good with mortars. They'd carry them with them. We called it, they would snipe with mortars. Well, you would snipe with an M1 rifle. They could snipe with a mortar, a 61 or an 82, or an 81, 82. Yeah, they had 1 millimeter bigger than ours. Their mortars were the 61 and the 82. So that if they came and if they overrun one of our positions, they could take our 60 millimeter projectiles and drop them in their 61 tubes and fire them all day. But if we overran them and captured their 61 millimeter mortar rounds, we couldn't drop them into 62. You might get away with it once, but it might blow up in your face the next time you drop one in, because it ain't coming out of that tube, not so fast. And it was the same with the mortars. We had 81s, they had 82s, so they could take our 81s and drop in their 82 tubes, but we couldn't do the same with their rounds. I don't know if the Russians have figured this out or what. It seemed to me to be very fishy, because why would one country make a 60 and the other 61, and one in 81 and one in 82? I don't know. Anyway. But the Turks also fired in support of us. The Turks see, the UN, this was a United Nations war. The only one that really supported us was the 1st Commonwealth Division. 1st Commonwealth had a full division there. Nobody else did, except the United States Army. They had half a dozen or a dozen divisions there. And the ROKs did a hell of a good job. The ROKs, it seemed when the ROKs had their own division with their own leaders, they hated the Chinese, I think, worse than we did. And they did a good job. But to mix them didn't work very well at all. It was a language barrier. There was just different ways of doing things. They felt that it should be done this way, and whatever. So there were ROKs who were given Korean Presidential Unit citations and U.S. Unit citations. I know that and so did the Turks, but the Turks, all the Turks had there was an artillery battalion. They had nothing else, just no ground troops. They had an artillery battalion. And there were several countries there, but a lot of them were in support. The Indians were there with a hospital, running hospitals and stuff like that. So there were, but the two biggest, the United States was the largest by far. The ROKs in the United States, Army and Marine Corps, and the ROK, and then everybody else was small except the Commonwealth, which was a full division, made up of Canadians, British, Australians, and New Zealanders.
What are your feelings about the replacement of MacArthur?
Well, we get into politics. I just said, again, as I told my daughter, who's a journalist, and I said to her that these people complaining about Vietnam and complaining about the Desert Storm and all that, and we lost Korea. We lost. I said, we didn't lose nothing. In Korea, what we wanted to do was the first thing, MacArthur was going to bomb the bridges over the Yalu, and he tried to explain this to Truman and stop it's the way he put it, was stop the millions of feet, or pitter-patter of feet, of the Chinese People's Army crossing the bridges over the Yalu. Stop the troops and stop the supplies from coming into North Korea, and you'll stop this war. The hell with Russia and China, or they, at that point in time, they had no atomic weapons anyway, and they were all worried about this, and they're all, the politicians are all worried about something other than they start something. They started this thing in Korea. They told MacArthur and whatever to do what had to be done or whatever. So, but then they won't let you finish it. What he wanted to do, or even Eisenhower at the end, was to take the 1st Marine Division, who was now on the Western Front, pull us out, and take us north about 20 miles into up the Yellow Sea, and make an amphibious landing behind the main Chinese line. And this would cut off their supply route to the MLR, the whole line. And they thought he was wacky. So they wouldn't let him do that. We found out, and I swear to you, we found this out when we got over there, that we were not to make any advances toward the Chinese. You were to keep the Jamestown Line, which was the 38th parallel, and the OPs in front of it, which was the buffer, so that they weren't sitting on your MLR, they were fighting you on these OPs. And do not make any great moves north. You are not to move advance. You're just to maintain the 38th parallel. Well, you're getting guys killed daily and wounded. In October of '52, we had 1,800 casualties in the 1st Marine Division. And as one 2nd lieutenant, or one 1st lieutenant, who they said, this poor guy will never become a captain, he's done it now. He said, what is wrong with the upper echelon? Don't they know that the Chinese, if they can expel or waste that many men per month to sit here and do nothing but maintain this 38th parallel, then there's something wrong with this war. We've either got to push them the hell out of here or get out of here, one or the other. And the only way to do that was to pull them first out, take it up up the China Sea, and come in behind them about 20, 40 miles, whatever, and cut right across in behind the whole damn Chinese front. And with a 1, 2, 3, 4 divisions, whatever it took, and come in. And oh my God, I guess Congress that was, you were a warmonger to even bring this up. The people won't go for it. So as I told my daughter, what stops the war? People that are left at home and the politicians. If they'd let these generals run, if you're gonna start a war in the Middle East, Asia, I don't care where, then make up your mind you want to win it. Because there's no sense in having 58,000 guys killed in Vietnam and 34,000 killed in Korea if you're not going to win something. And just to pull out and then if we were to pull out of Korea, then we would probably slaughtered half the South Koreans. The same thing that happened in Vietnam, and I think the same thing is going to happen in Iraq if these politicians are, oh, we're going to pull them out. If they pull them out, the Sunnis and the Shiite, they'll all kill each other, whatever. And so, then why did we do it in the first, what the hell are we doing there? Why did we go there? Don't anybody figure these things out? I guess not to live there for a while. But anyway, even in Korea, they never signed a peace agreement. It's still, there's no peace agreement signed. There's still a 38th parallel. They're still sitting on the Jamestown Line. Now, when we were in reserve, we didn't sit around and sunbathe or anything. We went through maneuvers, and we also started to build the Kansas Line. The Kansas Line was about 2 or 3 miles back from the Jamestown Line. We started building trenches and laying wire, and we did this for a couple of months, you know, when we were in reserve. We did this. And that's, and when the 5th was in reserve, they worked on it when the 7th, and we had several thousand South Korean the fathers of the sons who were fighting in the front. They were, we call them yobos, hobos, but they were a South Korean, like the CCC, and they were helping us build the trenches and digging and laying wire and all that. So we had already, while we were, they're still up at the front, we're in reserve, we're building a secondary line called the Kansas Line, which would have been used if they'd overrun us. We'd have fallen back to the Kansas Line.
So you weren't allowed to advance, but you had a fallback position.
We were building a fallback.
Now, you said the last 3 months you went back to truck driving?
Yes, after the hook, or I mean after, in March 26th through March 30th, we lost Reno, Vegas, and Carson, the gambling bowl, or the Nevada Cities Bowl, which was the 19th heaviest action that the United States saw while the 3 years in Korea. It was March 19th. It lost a hell of a lot of guys. They lost several hundred dead. They overrun the 3. We took 2 of them back, and the other one stayed in their hands. But when that happened, they had also lost the captain or major of our battalion had lost his driver. It had been hit by a round and killed or blown up. So anyway, the lieutenant asked me, "You want to get back into driving?" And I said, "Oh my God, no, I get back into driving." He said, "All right." He said, "We have an opening." And he said, "You'll be driving the commander around across the front behind the MLR, driving him from one spot to another." So I started that, and then I started driving truck. Now when they shit at the fan in the latter part of June, all the way through July, and that's why we were given the Secretary of the Navy in 1955 awarded us the Navy Commendation Medal for holding the ground or the Valley de Sol, along with all the Army artillery divisions involved, or regiments or battalions, and the KMC. That medal was given to everybody by the Secretary of the Navy. But I was hauling ammo during the whole month of July. I drove a 5-ton and hauling ammo as much as we could get on it. 8-inch 155s and 105s. And hauling them to the Army units, Turk and Marine Corps 11th Regiment. And we drove the last 3 days of that war. I slept 2 hours. as I recall, slept 2 hours. I was waiting to be loaded and I fell asleep in my truck. And that's all we did was drive back. And it was going from the frying pan into the fire. We come into a valley one night. It was a long valley, a half a mile deep in the MLRs up here, and the whole place is lit up. Incoming, outgoing, whatever. And there's 3 infantry battalions in here firing. So we're taking a truckload to each one of them, all night long. We're going down a road which is full of potholes from rounds hitting it, and the whole valley lit up to our left. They had put in a rocket barrage, the automatic. I think it was 24 round or 48 round or whatever it was. And it lit up that whole valley with white phosphorus. All the rounds were white phosphorus. And this Willie Peter, it burnt my truck. I didn't get hit, but my supply sergeant with me got hit. And when we come back out, we unloaded the artillery. These guys were stripped down to their waist. They were wearing no flak jacket, no nothing. It was so hot, and they're firing as fast as they can fire. And we unloaded, they talked to us for a minute, and we left, and we came down the other side, and a round hit in front of the truck, smashed the windshield. I didn't get, again, a scratch on me, but I could not see. I was totally blind for about a half an hour. I couldn't see. I just slammed on the brakes, threw in gear, or pulled emergency, and I just sat there. I got out of the truck, and he held on to me, and on the side of the truck, I couldn't see nothing. I could not see for about a half an hour, and then it started to come back. And I thought I was, blind for life. So anyway, we got out of there. But that's what we did for the last month, and that's what that award was based on, by the Secretary of the Navy, that we held the Valley of the Soil.
And when did you return home? Back to the States?
We returned back to the States because of the ships that they couldn't get working around the 1st of November. 1st to the middle of November of '53.
Mm-hmm.
I had a 2-week leave, and then I was supposed to be stationed at the closest spot to your home, the closest base to your home before discharge, which was in Brooklyn Navy Yard. Brooklyn Navy Yard was full, and of Marines that, MPs or whatever. So I was assigned to Great Lakes, Illinois, the Naval Training Center at Great Lakes, and I was an MP taking bad sailors back and forth to court. That was good duty, though. Every other day, you were one day on, one day off, one day on. All the time. You had pressed, when you had 2 uniforms, and when you were on duty, your uniform was being pressed, so that the next day you were off, and then you'd have, so every day you would work, every other day you'd have a full pressed uniform. Whether or not it was clean, it was still full pressed, and that's all they cared about. And you carried a white lanyard, and a white belt, and a 45, and it looked pretty when you were at the court. But these guys were all Navy guys who had gone AWOL and been in a bar fight. Or a couple of them were in there for murder, and taken to court. So it was.
When were you finally discharged?
February 14th. I went in on the 15th of February and was discharged on the 14th of February '53.
Did you
Or
ever,
54.
54?
54.
Did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
Yes, I then went to, I married about a year after, but then I went to Erie County Community College for 2 years, evening courses under the GI Bill for air conditioning and refrigeration.
Okay.
We're gonna stop and put a new tape in.
Okay. In a apartment complex for the elderly down on William Street off of Union, right near the corner there.
Okay, we're rolling.
Okay, did you join any veterans organizations at all?
Yeah, I belong to the VFW. I joined the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I've talked to the men at the fairgrounds every year about joining the Marine Corps Veterans Association, and I haven't done it. The VFW is about the only thing I support. I like their magazine, read the articles, and you know, I get that every month.
Did you ever stay in contact with anyone that served with you?
The only, it was a long time ago. What I did when I got out of the Marine Corps, and I was interviewed at Great Lakes by a young lieutenant. He looked like he was about 14 years old. And he said to me, he wanted me to ship over. And I said, you know, I became a corporal in November, just before Thanksgiving of 1951. And I passed my sergeant's test in February of 52. But they had no openings, they said. And when I went to Korea, they weren't interested in promoting anybody, any ranks or anything else. I mean, we had some PFCs running squads, and that was usually a corporal or a sergeant. And he said to me, so I said, I couldn't, I've been almost a sergeant, or passed the sergeant's test 2 years ago, and you haven't given me sergeant, so why would I rejoin, or why would I join the Marine Corps, or stay in the Marine Corps for? Well, if you say you stay in, he says, pretty sure you'd get your sergeant straight away. You're pretty sure, well, Lieutenant, please, I'm leaving, I'm gone. So so I got out, and in April, I joined the New York National Guard. I joined the New York National Guard, the 106th Field Artillery, out of the Maston Avenue Armory in Buffalo. And I was in charge, it was the 27th Division, 106th Field Artillery, and I was in charge, of course I drove a 5-ton truck hauling the 155 back and forth to Camp Drum at that time for 3 years. We, you know, I guess we met every Monday night or something. And they gave me staff sergeant. I was a staff sergeant in the National Guard.
So you were in the Guard from what years?
54 to 57.
And then you got out and...
And that was it.
How do you think your time in the service had an effect on your life?
Well, it gave me an understanding, for one thing, of just what war was. I didn't understand at that time the politics of this whole thing until after I was working and married, and we went through this Vietnam, which I thought would never end. And then we came, and we had little battles here and there, Grenada and whatever, and then we went to the Middle East, and I just, now in doing research, you see, my grandfather, John McNabb, was with the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery out of Hamilton, Ontario, and he was in the Boer War in 1899 and 1900 in South Africa. And then in 1915, because he was in the Home Guard, or what they call the 13th Militia in Ontario, he again went into World War One. Only this time it was the Royal Canadian, the Expeditionary Forces. That Britain calls these guys. See, when a war starts somewhere like it did in South Africa, Britain calls Australia, New Zealand, and Canada on the line, and India, and says, come on, you gotta help us. So anyway, this is how they got them out of Canada. And, but then World War I was the same way. It was before we entered the war. But when I'm doing research on him. I just finished the Boer War, and I'm starting into World War II. My uncle was in the Royal Canadian Light Infantry, the Wentworth Regiment out of Hamilton, and he was in the GI Parade of 42. 42, yeah, August of 42. And I'm doing him, and then I'm doing me, and then I'm doing my brother who died last year, who was also with a Marine Artillery in Korea. He was on the Eastern Front. But when I look at all, and I research, and I listen to people like the Kennedys and the senators and Hillary and all of these people, right up to today, I just wonder, World War II, we had to do what we did in World War II. But I look back and I wonder the decisions that were made in Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf, Iraq. I wonder. I just wonder. And only time will tell, I guess.
Mhm.
But as my father always told me, because he was brought up that way, he said he was brought up in a farm in Michigan. He said, you know, Father Coughlin used to be on the radio in the 30s.
Remember hearing about him?
Yes, told me there'll always be wars and rumors of wars. So,
If you could hold each one of these up and tell us when and where they were taken?
this was taken at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, after I had received my orders to report to Camp Pendleton, California. And because Camp Pendleton was on the West Coast, I figured my next stop would probably be Korea.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Now this picture was actually taken on the backside of OP Vegas. And that's out in front of the MLR. And that day what I was doing was working with the sniper rifle. I had just put a scope on a rifle and we were testing it out. The problem is we didn't find a target. So I never used the rifle, but that's what I was doing. I had a 3.5 scope on it. And this is also in Vegas, and that's in April of '53. April of '53, and that's on OP Vegas, and that's just before it was actually during the Nevada City's campaign. I went driving a truck. We were relieved by the 25th Army Division offline on May 1st of '53 for 90 days. We had been up there so long, and we were about half of a division left. And the 25th come up, the Wolfhounds, and they replaced us. And the Wolfhounds were there, they're supposed to be there 90 days. They would have taken us right out of the war. But the Wolfhounds, they found out after about 7 weeks, they had it. So we had all new troops, we had all new equipment, and we went back up the 3rd week of June till the end. But this was just before we were relieved, and it was on Vegas before I got my Jeep or my truck back. As I told my daughter, I thought I was relieved. Second Corsairs had gone. Yeah. This was on, there's actually two hills here. This was on the 21st of November of 1952. It says May of 53, Sunday, that's, which is incorrect. It was November 21st, 1952. We were going to assault hills 150 and 153 that night. We were actually in reserve, but we were going to a full company raid. We had, with a mortar company with us and heavy machine guns, a water-cooled and a couple of 50s. And we were gonna, all we were gonna do, we weren't trying to take hills 150 and 153, we were going to drop satchel charges into all their bunkers and everything and totally destroy the two outposts. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, all the fire team leaders of the company commander, the battalion commander, all met on a ridge on the MLR and watched 4 Corsairs have a picnic. They come in and they dropped something like 3,000 gallons of napalm on the 2 hills, across the 2 hills. Then they dropped 500 pounders on the next run, and then they strafed them with 20mm cannon. And a G2 officer was there. He was a lieutenant colonel. And this is where he reminded me of John Murtha, if you know who John Murtha is. And he said, he looked around at us and he said, nobody could live through that. That night when we pulled that raid, we got there at around 3:30 in the morning by the time we got to the hills. They ambushed us. We had 2 dead and 89 wounded, 55 stretcher in about an hour and a half. We never got to the hills. And the whole side of those hills, I had my 3 men with me. We were in a ditch, firing. I had 2 light 30s firing over my head, and that whole hill was firing at us. And they had napalmed it, bombed it, and strafed it that afternoon at 4 o'clock. Amazing. Yeah, that's North Champaign. That's after the war, and that's taken of me with the garbage. I had just gone to the garbage dump. Just gone to the garbage dump. Now, one thing amazingly about the garbage dumps, we would take the garbage there, and we had an assistant with us, or a couple of Korean civilians who would shovel all the garbage into a pit. It was dug, the pit was dug with a bulldozer. And this pit was full, maybe 2, 3, 4, up to 4 foot of slop and every garbage description you could think of. Crawling in that pit were about 50 Korean civilians taking the food, eating it while they're doing this. And 2 Korean security people with white uniforms go up to us and told us, don't take any pictures of that. Don't you dare take any pictures of that. So we said, oh, we don't need to take the pictures. I have the pictures. And it down in there, my wife, she couldn't believe it. Oh, this is from Medals of America. I had this made up because I have 6 medals and 9 ribbons. The reason there's 9 ribbons is there's the Navy Marine Corps Presidential Unit Citation, there's the Korean Presidential Unit Citation, and there's also the Combat Action Badge, which do not have a medal. They're ribbon only. So that are the 6 medals. And the 6 medals, of course, here's the Navy Marine Corps Commendation for guarding the Valley de Sol. The Good Conduct Medal. My daughter still won't believe that. The National Defense. The Korean Service Ribbon with 3 campaign stars or 3 battle stars. The UN Ribbon and the Korean Commemorative 50th Anniversary Medal. And then I had a pistol. I got this when I was an MP. And this is my M1. When I was in boot camp, I did make sharpshooter. Didn't make expert, but I made sharpshooter. And then, of course, I was in the 1st Division, and the 2nd Division.
Well, thank you very much for your interview.
Thank you.